Welcome to today's show. My name is John. As always, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcast, formerly known as iTunes, or follow the links to social media in the podcast show notes. So please subscribe when you're finished listening. You can also go to snarkymoviereviews.com to read notes, bios, and other random movie thoughts. I'm glad to get to the third of our October Mummy movies. It was 88 degrees here today, and I'm really enjoying this autumn weather. The Mummy's Ghost 1944 is very similar to The Mummy's Tomb 1942, with a couple of better actors like John Carradine and Barton McLean. This movie has a 33% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. However, the plot has a Mack truck-size hole in it. Did they even watch the earlier movies before they slapped this together? Anyway, it's a fun watch, and I really enjoyed seeing the young John Carradine. So I'll jump right into the show veterans, of which there are a few. Actors.
Right, and I'm a Shakespearean actor.
Lon Chaney Jr. returned in the role of Kharis, a.k.a. the Mummy. Chaney was first covered in Episode 5 of Mice and Men, 1939. George Zucco reprised his role as the High Priest from The Mummy's Hand, 1940, and The Mummy's Tomb, 1942, but this time working for a different sect. Zucco was first covered in Episode 127, The Mummy's Hand, 1940. Frank Reacher returned as Professor Matthew Norman, the role he had in The Mummy's Tomb, 1942. However, his part was much larger this time. Reacher was first covered in Episode 1, King Kong, 1933. John Carradine appeared as the young priest that replaces the high priest and executes the mission, Yusuf Bey. Carradine was covered in Episode 12, Billy the Kid vs. Dracula, 1966. Barton McLean was cast in the role of Inspector Walgreen, bringing more gravitas to this character. McLean was covered in Episode 100, The Maltese Falcon, 1941. Martha Vickers showed up as an uncredited student. Vickers was briefly mentioned in Episode 10, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, 1943. Robert Lowry played Tom Hervey. Lowry was born in Missouri in 1913. He grew up and went to school in Kansas City and later played minor league ball. An injury ended his sports career, and when his father died early, Lowry and his mother moved to Los Angeles to find work. Lowry enrolled in acting school, and after several plays, he signed with Fox in 1938. He is known for The Mark of Zorro, 1940, Batman and Robin, 1949, The Rise and Fall of Legs Diamond, 1960, and McClintock, 1963, where he played the incompetent territorial governor chasing John Wayne's wife, played by Maureen O'Hara. He kept himself busy on television and running a celebrity cruise business. Lowry died on New Year's Eve, 1971. Ramsey Ames played Egyptian college student Amina Mansouri. Ramsey was born in New York City in 1919.
I'm walking here!
Ramsey made a living as a model, dancer, and a singer. During a visit to California, she had a chance meeting with Columbia President Harry Cohn. This led to a screen test and a movie role in Two Senoritas from Chicago, 1943. Her best-known films are Calling Dr. Death, 1943, The Mummy's Ghost, 1944, Follow the Boys, 1944, and The Gay Cavalier, 1946. It is said that more stuntmen were hurt on back lots running across roofs to look at her than were generally hurt filming a Western. In the late 1940s, she moved to Spain with her husband, where she had a television interview show. Ramsey died in 1998. Story.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
This movie is more or less a continuation of The Mummy's Tomb, 1942, which is, of course, more or less a continuation of The Mummy's Hand, 1940, which more or less used clips from The Mummy, 1932, and shuffled the original story. After departing from the story of The Mummy, 1932, they made it pretty clear that Kharis needs the juice of 3 Tana leaves each night during the full moon cycle. Without getting dragged back into the argument about how long a full moon actually lasts, I want to know how long it's been since Kharis burned to death in the Banning House in The Mummy's Tomb, 1942, and exactly how is he still alive if no one was there to give him his tea? The people in the movie talk about remembering when the last mummy attack happened, so I get the feeling it was more than 30 days. Is it in the title, The Mummy's Ghost? Is this mummy a ghost of a mummy that is a reanimated dead man? Ah, the world may never know. The actual movie begins with some shots around the pyramids. Then it reuses a long shot of a man walking towards Ananka's temple. Inside, Andoheb, George Zuko, the high priest of Arkham, is alive and waiting for the arrival of the young priest, Yusuf Bey, John Carradine. Andoheb is no longer working for the priest of Karnak, probably having lost that job due to incompetence. The two men meet, and Andoheb gives him the mission briefing. Andoheb lays out the entire tale of how the mummy was created.
Her soul accursed forever. Kharis was buried with her. Then, 30 years ago...
When Andoheb says 30 years ago, the scene switches to Mapleton, Massachusetts, where Professor Matthew Norman, Frank Reacher, teaches archaeology to a very skeptical group.
An expedition located and entered the tomb of Ananka. Managing to escape the guarding mummy, they brought the body of the Princess Ananka here to America. It is now one of the choice possessions of the Scripps Museum. This, however, did not end the matter. The secret cult, the priests of Arkham, smuggled the monster Kharis into this country and right into our own vicinity, Mapleton. He was turned loose, and every living member of the party who had dared set foot into that faraway tomb died by his hands.
He tells the story of Kharis and Ananka and the small role he had in tracking the mummy. He tells them that he saw the creature and examined the mold on the bandage. He also says he has been researching with the remaining Tana leaves. After class, a student asks Tom Hervey, Robert Lowry, about his Egyptian girlfriend, Amina Mansouri, Ramsey Ames, and he gets all pissy.
At least our ancestors were.
And your ancestors used to live in caves, so maybe you can tell us where to find the missing link.
Oh, don't get angry now. She was my girlfriend. I'd ask her.
Well, she isn't, so don't bother.
Of course, we know this town has a history of racial profiling of Egyptians. Anyway, Tom says she gets all weird anytime Egypt is mentioned. Tom drops by Amina's work, and she has raven-colored hair. Of course, Tom brings up Egypt. When she gets all weird, he presses the issue. When she picks up some books on Egypt, she gets very weak. Back in Egypt, Andoheb is giving Yusuf Bey a class on Kharis and says the mission is to bring Kharis and Ananka back to Egypt. Yusuf takes the vow willingly.
Your mission is to bring him back to Egypt, and with him Ananka, his beloved princess. Now swear by the ancient gods of Egypt that you will never rest until the Princess Ananka and Kharis have been returned to their rightful resting places in these tombs.
I swear by the mighty power of Amun-Ra, whose anger can shatter the world, and by the dread horror of Set, that I shall never forsake my trust as a priest of Arkham.
Andoheb explains how to make the Tana tea that calls Kharis back, but only during the full moon. Back in Mapleton, Dr. Norman is hard at work decoding a message on a vase. He realizes that he must brew 9 Tana leaves during the full moon. His wife begs him to come to bed, but he stays up and continues to work. He brews 9 Tana leaves, and the mummy shuffles out of the woods, looking a little worse for the burning he took. Amina squirms in her bed like a hooker in church. Finally, she gets up and walks trance-like in the same direction as the mummy to the house of Professor Norman. The mummy comes in through the open door and goes straight towards the professor. You have to move side to side. The mummy is good at going forward. It is reported that Lon Chaney was so into the role at this point that he actually left bruises on the neck of actor Frank Reacher. The mummy drinks the fluid and leaves. Amina sees the mummy and awakens from her trance just in time to pass out on the street in her PJs. She has also grown a nasty mole on her wrist. In the morning, Tom gets word that Norman has been killed and Amina has been found outside. He heads over. The sheriff, Harry Shannon, and the coroner, Emmett Bogan, are examining the body, and when they see the marks on the neck, they know right away it's mold and the mummy is back.
What does it look like, Coroner?
Strangulation. The traces of foreign substance on the throat. That's mold.
The mummy.
They have Amina sitting and crying in the same room with the body. The sheriff starts grilling Amina, but she can't remember anything.
Now you can tell us what you were doing outside this house last night.
No, I can't. I don't know.
Do you usually go walking on the campus in your nightgown?
I tell you, I don't know how I got there last night. Or why.
Well, something happened here to make you faint. What was it?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Now look, Miss Manzori, I don't want to get tough.
She has a huge white streak in her once dark hair. Tom bursts into the room and tries to provide an alibi for Amina, but they separated at 11 p.m. and the murder took place near midnight. The sheriff finally releases her. The newspapers show that the mummy is back in Mapleton. Everyone that is able registers to watch the streets for the mummy.
All the money in the world wouldn't get me out tonight. I remember the last time this happened. It was pretty horrible.
Yusuf has shown up in town as well. On the next full moon, Yusuf brews the 9 tanna leaves to summon Kharis.
Bring Kharis to me. Wherever he is, guide his steps into these hills where I await him. Make him to know that I prepare again for him the cup of life.
The mummy almost gets Amina and Tom as they park at a lover's lane. A man comes out of the woods and a couple leaves because they are scared. The mummy is shuffling through a farm when he is attacked by a dog. The man from the woods goes out to see what it is, and the mummy dispatches him. The sheriff investigates and they find mummy prints. They form a search party and head out after the mummy. Finally, the mummy shows up and has his tanna leaves. Yusuf takes control of the mummy and the next day heads to the Scripps Museum, which I guess is located in New York City. Yusuf goes on the mummy tour, but slips back to the mummified body of Anaka. Later that night, Yusuf lets the mummy into the museum. Yusuf prepares the ceremony as the mummy shuffles, and the night guard listens to murder stories on the radio. Kharis touches the wrappings around Anaka's body, and it deflates. At the same time, Amina sits up in bed and screams. The mummy is kind of freaking out, but Yusuf knows that the soul of Anaka has entered another form. The mummy starts destroying the room. The night guard comes in and takes a couple of shots at the mummy, but is quickly killed. Actor Chaney breaks the glass and cuts his chin through the mask and can be seen bleeding during this scene. Amina says she felt a cold touch of someone in her room. Later that day, Tom tries to get the sheriff to let him take her away from town. He tells Tom of the murder in the museum. In the museum, Police Inspector Walgreen, Barton McLean, and Dr. Ayad, Lester Sharp, can't understand how the body of Anaka disappeared, leaving the wrappings behind.
As an authority and an Egyptian, what do you make of this?
I don't know what to make of it. There's not a trace of Ananka's body.
Looks like this is one time you museum fellas had something put over on you. Maybe there never was a body under those wrappings.
As curator of the Scripps Museum, I examined this mummy when it was first brought in. I assure you the body of Anaka was there.
All right, Doctor, but then it's possible, isn't it, the mummy took it last night?
It would have been impossible for anyone to remove the body without unwinding the bandages that bound it. You can see for yourself, not a single wrapping has been cut.
Dr. Ayad reads the curse of Anaka off the sarcophagus. It says her body can take another form. Walgreen and Ayad head to Mapleton and get a briefing from the sheriff. Ayad recognizes the tanna leaves and reads the hieroglyphics on the box to find out that the mummy can be summoned. Walgreen thinks that's a great thing to do. Walgreen tells him to dig a pit in front of the door to trap the mummy.
How deep did you dig it?
10 feet, all right?
That should be. You're going to camouflage that better, aren't you?
Oh, sure.
Amina is still suffering and Tom plans to take her out of town and marry her. He leaves his dog with Amina. Yusuf prays to Amun-Ra to help the mummy find the soul of Anaka. He sends Kharis out and says he will recognize her by a sign, which is the mole on her wrist. Yusuf and Kharis have been holed up in an abandoned mill. Walgreen interviews Professor Norman's wife and finds out that they need to brew 9 tanna leaves. Ayad starts cooking the tea. Amina is having a rough night and the dog wakes her. Again in a trance and her PJs, she heads towards the mummy. When she sees the mummy, she passes out and he carries her away. Amina's guardian sees the mummy carrying her away and calls Tom. Tom heads out after her. The little dog follows. The guardian runs and warns Walgreen what has happened. The dog leads Tom towards the mill. What? Timmy's trapped in the well? The mummy delivers Amina to Yusuf and more of her hair is turning white. They verify that she is Anaka by the mark on her wrist. Yusuf tells Amina that she is Anaka and she takes it really well.
Who are you? Why am I here?
I am a priest of Arkham, and you are here because the gods have willed it so.
Let me go.
Do you not know who you are?
I am Amina Mansouri.
You are the Princess Ananka, third daughter of Amenophis, one-time pharaoh of all Egypt.
You're mad.
The mob of armed lawmen are heading towards the mill. Yusuf starts having second thoughts and wants to get funky with Amina, whose hair is now completely white.
The gods will look with favor upon you. Why do you not rejoice? Perhaps because it grieves you to consign this lovely girl to death again. Why should she not live, Yusuf Bey? Why should you not live?
He plans on giving her a dose of Tana leaves so he can live with her forever. This is like the third time the mummy has heard this tripe, and he attacks Yusuf. He slaps Yusuf out the window, killing him. Tom arrives at the mill and meets the mummy coming down the conveyor. The mummy beats the crap out of Tom and goes back to Amina. Kharis grabs Amina and runs out the back. She is getting older all the time. The lawmen show up and the mummy flees into the swamp. As Tom and the men follow, the aging Amina, now Ananka, heads deeper into the swamp with Kharis. Finally, they sink in the water as Tom and the others watch from a distance. Thank goodness that mummy is finally dead. But really? The leading lady dies? When does this happen? World famous short summary. 2 men fight over the best looking woman around. I hope you enjoyed today's show on Classic Movie Reviews with Snark. You can find connections to social media and email on my site at snarkymoviereviews.com. There are links in the podcast show notes as well. Remember, the show is completely free and independent. All I ask is that you jump over to Apple Podcast, formerly known as iTunes, and give me a review. It really helps the show get found. Beware the Moors.